looking at some more recent papers at this point, another one that's worth taking a look at is Clendon, Sturm, and Cali. And this is called Vocabulary Use Across Genres, Implications for Students with Complex Communication Needs. And the researchers here were actually looking at 120 plus typically developing kindergarten and first grade students, and they were writing about topics that they chose. They decided what to write about. But what the authors were then able to do was to look at the words generated and found that 140 words accounted for 70% of the vocabulary.
Amazing.
And again, the one thing that this does is it reinforces the notion of core. So all these different studies start to reinforce that core is common. And the second is that this also shows that even written vocabulary can be following this core as well. So it's not just spoken language that uses a core, written can be using the core as well. So even if you're looking at working with clients who are literate or non-literate, or are non-literate and becoming literate,
yes,
working on core is still a good idea, because that's also going to feed into the development of literacy. A common question that people usually have is, it really seems much easier for me to teach things like apple and banana and dog and cat and shoes. I just give you a picture and the object and you match and I teach it. But teaching things like want and more and need, that's much more difficult. Does that really work? Can you really do that? Well, an interesting paper, another recent one, is from Snodgrass, Stoner, and Angel. That's 2013.
Okay.
And this is called Teaching Conceptually Referenced Core Vocabulary for Initial, Augmentative, and Alternative Communication.
Now that's a title.
It's a great title. It's not crews, whoppers, and wusses, but it's very accurate, because this is exactly what they did. This is a single case study, and they were looking at a 9-year-old with multiple disabilities. By multiple disabilities, I mean intellectual disability and deaf blindness, and using a tactile symbol system.
Wow.
So this is, this is somebody who, has multiple challenges to do this. Yet, by having 3 referenced symbols for more, done, and new, 3 core words, along with some other sort of fringe type words to pin to, they were able to teach this young guy those core words, and he was able to use these core words and with different types of fringe words. So focusing on the core isn't an impossible task. It's useful, it's something you can do, and certainly you're going to try and pin it with other fringe words. You don't have to use them in isolation. You
Right.
can use them in conjunction. But by focusing on them, if we can teach somebody with severe intellectual disability and deaf blindness using a tactile system to get core words, then that bodes well for our general teaching of core to anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Another area that I'm particularly interested in is the specific teaching of morphology. By morphology, we mean the way that words end. So the difference between eat and eating and eats. The difference between happy, happier, and happiest.
And most people would call that grammar.
And the grammar, yeah. So so we're talking about word endings here. And the ability to handle that is very important, because most of the time when we look at what we say, a lot of the words come from a base word plus an ending.
Right.
And so one of the things you can do is to teach a morphological style by teaching people to be aware of those endings. And an example of this was Goodwin, Lipsky, and Ahn in 2012. This one's called Word Detectives Using Units of Meaning to Support Literacy. Mm-hmm. And this goes through intervention based on teaching overtly different types of morpheme and how they work. And what they found here, and I'll quote from the abstract, which is children receiving morphological instruction performed significantly better on measures of literacy achievement, especially in the areas of phonology and morphological awareness, decoding, spelling, and vocabulary skills. And I think the vocabulary skills is important because that's what we're working on a lot of the time in AAC is the vocabulary. And the reason that the suggestion here, that the improvement of vocabulary skills, is that if you learn how to modify words by using morphology, you also learn to decode by morphology. So when you come across new vocabulary, you can break the word down easier when you see it. You know, if it ends in an ing, you can sort of break down that, oh, maybe it's a verb.
Right.
And then if you see another version of this with an S on the end, now you say, must be a verb, yeah. Now, you're not actually conscious of sitting there in your head thinking, oh, it's a verb, and therefore it inflects this way. But what the suggestion is that because you've learned to break things down by morphology overtly, it does improve your general vocabulary skills, because you can then also learn new words and understand how they're structured.
Yeah, interesting. Well, you oftentimes, like in children who are developing language, and if you had a young child come to you and say, I go with you, you would automatically correct them and say, I am going with you. And we do that, I guess, as overtly. And yet with our kids with AAC, we tend not to do that. We accept that they say the word I go, because that's a quick way for them to say it. So it's interesting how you see normal language development in young children versus with young children using AAC, and the differences that how we handle that type of morphology with our systems.
And in fact, that leads us straight on to our next key paper.
Oh
for
my
me.
goodness! Am I just giving you the segue into all of
You
this?
just segged me right way into Binger, McGuire Marshall, and Kent Walsh. And this is in 2011.
Okay.
And this is called Using AAC Models, Recasts, and Contrastive Targets to Teach Grammatical Morphemes to Children who use AAC. And that's pretty much what you were saying there, that one of the techniques that the folks here use is that recasting of, I goed to that's right, I went.
Yeah.
And this, and again, what these folks are doing here is working specifically with 3 children and targeting grammatical morphemes, and they had some success at doing this. I think they also found that there wasn't always a lot of the carryover didn't occur. So nobody's claiming here that this is this will work all the time, or but certainly the sort of work that Kathy Binger has been doing in this area of morphology development and AAC is really encouraging, and sort of suggests to us that using and teaching morphology as part of AAC is a good strategy, because it helps people not only understand language, but also to, as you said earlier, to understand new vocabulary items as well. So all this development in terms of language and research and vocabulary lists, etc., leads us to the point where we are now, where you can find a number of different vocabulary lists that are available out there, particularly the AAC journal, but you can find a lot of them, and they range from things such as the Bernardi, DiCarlo, and Burris-Strickland list from 2003. Which is basically the core vocabulary determination for toddlers. So you're looking here at a list of, I think it's like 25 words, of which all of them really are pretty much core words. Want, is, go, mine, what, here, more. And then from then, you find that more and more people are collecting and putting together different types of lists. And one...
But it's interesting what you said about the lists about carrying over all genders, all ages. And when you look at that word list, it's not any different than you would talk to your grandparents or your aged parents with those. They would be saying those same words. Right.
And that's exactly the point. And I have one last example here, which is a 100-word core list from my colleagues, Kara Bidstrup and Janet Leah, who have put together this 100-word suggested core list. And they broke it down into interjections, pronouns, question words, but there's 100 of these. And the other interesting thing to bear in mind here, that if you look at a number of these different lists, and this list is based on other lists, it's now not surprising to see that they all start to look very similar. But of course, you'd be more concerned if they didn't.
Right.
because they should look similar because they're now looking at some sort of core that fits everybody. So I, you know, all I wanted to do there was to run through these slides that we've got here to give what I call a short dash through the history of AAC and vocabulary. And you know, we've come from 1960, which again was pre-technology times as well. We've come from core samples of like 25,000 words to the fact that we now have corpora available based on 450 million words, or the Google corpus that now exists is based on billions of words.
Right.
So now we have much better ways of evaluating vocabulary, of assessing, of measuring, etc. And so we have better ways, I think, of creating these lists that we can give to people. But basically that was it. That was just a brief run through, and all those, people can go out and check all those references, and if they're stuck getting hold of them, give the folks at Aroga a call. I'm sure you can find them for them.
Great.